Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Justin Aquino. I am the founder and head coach at Cool Communicator, and I'm joined by my teammate, Julie Cortes, who is an award-winning copywriter based in Kansas City. Hey, Julie, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Awesome. So, super interesting topic today, calls to action. And Julie, you know a lot about this as a copywriter as well, because this is a major concept in the world of copywriting, advertising. So from your perspective, tell us a little bit about what do you see as a call to action? What's the definition of a call to action? How do you define it? And then we'll get into some tips and tactics on how people can actually implement this concept into their presentations.
Sure. So a call to action, sometimes abbreviated as a CTA, is really what it is that you want your audience to do. And typically this comes at the end of your presentation, or for me in writing, it comes at the end of writing an ad, right? Or the end of the website. What is it that you want them to do? Typically it has some very strong action words in them, verbs, right? It could be as short as one word. It could be one sentence, or it could be a small paragraph. Whatever it is that you want them to do, you want to have it clear and concise and get them excited and motivated to do what it is that you want them to do.
Yeah, I like to tell people to focus the call to action on just one simple task. Mm-hmm. Something very specific and easy for the audience to do. Don't give them a call to action that is like, and now climb Mount Everest. Right. Or maybe sign up for our Mount Everest newsletter. Go to www.whatever and then sign up. Something very easy and accessible for them to do. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be tangible, and easily accessible. And I think baby steps are the way to get there. Oftentimes you'll see in advertising, which is the world I come from, people will use the simple button of learn more. We see this all the time, learn more, read more. It's not necessarily, go buy this, multi-$1,000 product or service right this minute, but let's go learn more first. So yeah, absolutely agree with you. Make it baby steps, make it easily accessible.
And that requires understanding where in the decision-making process they are, right? Like if it's, like you said, if it's a very complex or expensive decision that you're trying to get them to eventually do, that's going to require a lot more buy-in. That's going to require a lot more support, right? And they have to really, potentially in a corporate context, there's multiple decision makers, multiple departments that need to buy into that. So be very aware of what would be a reasonable next step instead of just going for the jugular, right? Which I've seen, I've coached a number of business development reps and sales reps, and that's a common mistake that a lot of people make, is trying to go too far too fast.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think too, one thing that's often forgotten is we've got to share what the benefit is. What is the benefit to the consumer or to the big audience? What are they going to get out of this? And I feel like, to your point of where are we in the sales process, if you back up a step and you kind of build that into your presentation and you share what all the benefits are, not necessarily what the features are, but what the benefits are, and because everybody is honestly wondering what's in it for me. Right? At the end of the day, whether it's conscious or a subconscious thing, everybody wants to know what's in it for me. So let's tell them, let's make it very clear what's in it for you. And then here's the steps to get there.
Exactly. So in a business presentation context, what that looks like, what I've seen work with a lot of my clients and students is for example, you're pitching a project to your senior executives, for example, and you want $500,000 in funding for this project. It's good to start the presentation from a place of getting into the major challenges or the major opportunities for the company, how that aligns with the larger, the higher level or larger goals or mission of the company, especially the kinds of objectives that the senior leadership has articulated to the rest of the organization. So you start from that place, and then you build a case gradually throughout the course of the presentation. And then the idea is that inexorably leads to a specific call to action, right? So our objectives for this fiscal year are to expand market share and to increase user retention, blah, blah, blah. In order to do that, we're going to have to achieve X, Y, and Z. We're going to have to launch a number of projects, including my project, right? And so my project has a price tag of $500,000. There's other options also that we could do, but I think my project is the best option for the following reasons. And so the next steps, if we wanted to go through with that and we wanted to follow up on that process, would be X, Y, and Z. So that would be the next step. That'd be the actual call to action.
Sure.
So that's how I see that playing out in a lot of business situations.
Sure. And there's different ways that you can go about that. I think it's always important to find out what that emotional hotspot is, for each presentation, for each target audience member, and everybody's got them, so if, again, if we can go back and we can do our research and figure out who it is we're talking to, what are their pain points, let's really figure out what are the things that speak to them day in and day out, what resonates with them, and I feel like if we can really integrate that into our presentations, into our writing, into our communications as a whole, I think we're going to be better off.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I'm curious, like some examples that you've seen on emotional hotspots. And obviously we talked about this in our last webinar, in our last video, about how to make your message more persuasive and more impactful from an emotional standpoint. You can talk about the pride that you have in your team, for example. You're very proud of your team and everything they've accomplished, and you're really excited for new opportunities for the team, right? Channeling some of that emotion in your presentation makes such a difference. You become much more persuasive when you're asking for that specific action from the audience, right? Another big one that I've seen work very well, and this is to the other side, the negative side, the fear of losing out, FOMO.
Yes.
The fear that, hey, we're going to lose market share if we don't go through with this. So that creates urgency and a seriousness around the specific action in question that you're trying to get your audience to partake in.
Yeah, we use that in copywriting as well. FOMO, the fear of missing out, I guess it's the same as losing out. But yeah, we use that as well. This is an exclusive offer, act today, before time runs out, last chance, all of those things. And I feel like it definitely translates from copy to presentation. A call to action is a call to action. And I feel like the FOMO is definitely one of those things that, pulls on those emotional heartstrings, if you will, or the hotspots, yes, no, I do not want to be that person who has FOMO. I do not want to be missing out on this. This is my last chance. I better get in on this now. It creates a sense of urgency, with the listener.
Yeah, absolutely. So another major thing that I think is really valuable for calls to action is to utilize tangibles, specific, in the case of real life or in-person presentations. You think about worksheets, for example, or brochures or handouts. How can you incorporate those kinds of physical objects into your presentation or into the overall experience that you're creating in the meeting to facilitate a specific action right away? When you're giving a presentation, you have the audience's attention for the most part, not completely or 100%. Hopefully you have most of their attention.
Yeah.
So while you have their attention in the room, what can you do with that attention? Can you give them a worksheet to start filling out something, a sign-up form? Can you give them something to start sinking their teeth into to help them to work through the problem, at least at the initial stage? So that way you begin the process of actually leading towards the ultimate larger action that you want them to take, right? Another big thing is the phone. So everybody has one of these little devices, right? So think about what asset, a downloadable asset that you can give them a link to that they can download right away on the phone in the moment. Think about, sometimes we do surveys or polls, right? That people can access through the phone live in real time. So Mentimeter is a good resource for that. And there's others as well. So think about because everybody has that phone in their hand, right? So how can you get them to take some kind of action right away based on the information that you've given them in the presentation. So immediate actions, even small ones, can make a big difference because it starts to build up that momentum.
Yeah, and I like the idea of everybody's got their phone with them right then, right there. You know, it's not everybody will have their laptop with them. Not everybody will be able to like go to a website easily and quickly, you know, whereas a phone, and I've seen several speakers do this before, like here, text, you know, these 5 digits, you know, and text this word, whatever, you know, to these 5 digits, this number, and you'll get something in return. It's a free download. Or even, hey, scan the QR code that's on my screen right now, and you'll get this. You know, so I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and I really like that in the moment, have them do some sort of call to action right there.
Exactly. Yeah, it's something that's so simple, but it's easy to forget, you know. So you just want to think creatively, how to penetrate people's attention and leverage the attention that you have in the moment. Now, in the case of a remote environment, so you're doing a webinar, you're doing a meeting or presentation over Zoom or Skype or whatever, GoToMeeting. What about in that situation? Well, you can insert a link to a URL in the chat, for example. You can put a link to a downloadable asset, to a PDF or a video or some kind of infographic or something specific that gives them more information in addition to what you're presenting currently in the presentation, right? So those are things as well. Again, it's getting the audience to take action in the moment and kind of normalizing that action momentum and connecting it with the information that you're giving them.
Sure, and I feel from a speaker's perspective, this could be of dual benefit, right? If somebody texts that code or whatever it is that it is, now you've got their phone number, right? Now you've grabbed their phone number. You know, a lot of times I see speakers say, go to my website and, you know, at the bottom of my page, you can download this freebie, but oh, I need your email address, you know, before I get the freebie. So now that, now they're on your, you're on your distribution list. So I feel it's kind of a win-win situation for both parties.
Right, yes, exactly. So for entrepreneurs or business owners, that would be a major tactic that's really beneficial as well. So Julie, what else can presenters and speakers learn from the world of copywriting when it comes to effective calls to action?
You know, I think simpler is better. You know, keep it short, keep it sweet, but keep it really exciting, if you will. You know, I see the learn more button all the time, and it's like, okay, that's great, but how do we make that more exciting? It works, you know, and it definitely says what it is, but how can you make it more exciting? And I feel the same goes for the presentation world, for the speaking world. You know, yes, you can say those words, learn more, you can go here, discover more, whatever, but how can you make it more exciting? You know, and I feel like that's up to each presenter to decide what works best for them and for their target audience, what feels natural. You know, I feel like nobody wants to be sold to. We have to remember that at the end of the day, you know, so make it as less scary as possible. Again, make it more exciting, make it motivational, you know, showcase what the benefits are. And I feel like that's really going to help with everybody's presentation as they close out.
Yeah, absolutely. Trying to, especially in the business context, or the corporate context, you know, nobody wants to sit through a really long, boring presentation. You know, any kind of little personality or a moment of humor or a moment of fun or excitement that you can include in your presentation is like worth its weight in gold. I mean, people love that, you know, because it is so rare, especially when you're talking about situations where people are presenting to senior executives or any intimidating audience, you know, major decision makers at a client company, for example. It's a situation that is nerve-wracking for a lot of people. And when people are nervous, they go quiet. They become much more subdued. And as a result, their presentation becomes more boring. So I always encourage people to try to push themselves to show more of that personality in the moment.
Yeah, agreed.
So a couple other ways to make the call to action more compelling in a presentation context that I've seen work really well. You know, don't be afraid to make it a dialogue. Don't be afraid to go through your presentation. I mean, first of all, you can solicit questions and discussion throughout your presentation. Again, you can get creative with that. You know, it doesn't just have to be a monologue for 40 minutes followed by Q&A. Sometimes you can innovate and you can actually make it more of a dialogue throughout the 40 minutes. So that's one option. But at the end, when you're discussing different options of where do we go from here? Here's the problems, here's the challenges, here's the potential solutions, right? Maybe there's 3 major options that I, as the speaker, have determined are the best options. Option 1, 2, and 3. My personal preference is option 2 for the following reasons, but I want to get all of your input. You know, so Vice President so-and-so, what do you think? Senior Director of so-and-so, what do you think? Right? Let's have a dialogue around that. And I think that also takes away from that aggressive salesy dynamic, which a lot of presenters run the risk of falling into. What do you think about that, Julie?
I really like that concept. I like the idea of getting people engaged. Now, my only concern would be, you know, that person who does not want to be called on. You know, don't call on me. I can't think on my feet that quickly, you know, or they're very introverted or shy, you know. But yeah, I like that idea. I like it's almost like a brainstorm, you know, or it's one of those things where, you know, you can't make somebody buy into an idea unless it's their own idea, right? So when you have that dialogue, when you have that conversation, it's almost like, you know, the person you're talking to has this light bulb moment. Oh yeah, wouldn't it be great if, and of course you're like, I just totally put that into your head, you know, for the last half hour or whatever. But yes, it would be great, you know.
Exactly, yeah. So you can do it in a very subtle way, you know, and 2 more things I'll say related to that, because you made a good point. People like to, are much more likely to follow through on actions and decisions that they have bought into, right? It's one thing if you tell them what to do. It's another thing if they have bought into the decision themselves on the back end before it has become like an official rule or an official dictum, you know, official policy. The other thing is it takes the pressure off of the situation, you know, which makes a big difference in the dynamic and the persuasiveness of the meeting or the presentation, right? There's a lot of times where people will give a specific recommendation or a specific policy or call to action, and people will say, okay, that's an interesting idea, I'll think about it, right? Because we have a natural aversion, you kind of touched on this, Julie, to being told what to do,
right?
You know? And I mentioned this in one of my recent blog posts, maybe not so recent, but it's a blog post on the website. I'll put the link to it, about how to make calls to action more effective. But people a lot of times don't like being told what to do, so they like to buy in to the decision, and then they're much more likely to follow through on the action, which is ultimately what you really want. What are the differences in presenting a call to action to a more senior audience versus a more junior audience? So for example, senior executives versus, let's say, your direct reports or people that you have responsibility over. I'll throw out some of my thoughts on this question. First thing is to think about formal power versus informal power. So with people that you have formal power over, which is people that you are maybe outrank in the hierarchy, you have a lot more leeway and a lot more freedom to be more direct in your calls to action.
Sure.
With a more senior audience, it becomes more of a persuasion game. And you have to think about, like we've talked about, what are their self-interests? Emotionally, what are they going to respond to? What are they going to resonate with, right? You can't be as direct in those situations. You have to be a little bit more subtle. Those are some of the major distinctions to start formulating your call to action depending on the seniority of the audience. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree. You know, we keep having this recurring thought about knowing your audience, right? And knowing who they are and how to best cater to them. So yes, what are their interests? What are their pain points? What's going to resonate best with them? I completely agree. I feel like with the younger segment, you're going to be able to have a stronger call to action. I feel like you're going to have to, really, you could even have more fun with it, quite honestly. But the more senior level you get, I feel like it's got to be a little bit more serious. And yes, you definitely have to have them buy into it. Otherwise, they're going to feel like they're wasting, their time there. So I think you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, I think it also depends on the company culture.
Sure.
in the office culture. Some are much more casual, some are much more relaxed, and they're looking for more of a fun dynamic. Others are more serious and more conservative.
Sure.
And so, and thinking about the action specifically, you know, in some company cultures, they're very innovative, very ambitious. They like to think about big ideas. That's what gets people's attention. That's what excites people. So if you have a very strong and ambitious call to action, that might resonate really well, let's say in a very ambitious, hyper-growth startup context, for example. But in a more traditional, hierarchical, conservative corporate environment, maybe you want to be a little bit more hesitant or not as ambitious, or more, you know, slow going in the call to action. And then that will be received much better than something that just seems like it's totally crazy and over the top.
Right. I think too, there's something to be said for energy. I feel like, you know, the more passionate you get, the quicker you talk in a presentation. I feel like that's going to resonate more with, you know, those who are younger, you know, but the more senior level people are probably a little bit more methodical, a little bit more logical. You know, again, depending on the culture, of course, but I feel like just in general, you know, the older we get, it seems like the more serious we get. Yes, some of us still have fun, absolutely. But like, you know, you don't want to be played around with. So I think catering to that, and if you're dealing with the more senior audience, you know, you want to be talking a little bit slower, you know, definitely getting their buy-in along the way, and making it a serious topic, you know, but having to be impactful at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. One thing that I would definitely recommend to everybody when formulating your calls to action is shop it around, you know, practice with colleagues or with peers or even with people outside of your organization. Ask them, you know, basically run the presentation, even in an abbreviated form, you know, the basic outline of what you're pitching, and then the call to action itself, and get their input. You know, ask them, does it seem compelling? Does it make sense? Is it logical? You know, especially if you're at the beginning stages of your presentation skills and you're really trying to improve, think about how can I really strengthen this and refine this? A lot of times we don't know what we don't know, or something might make sense to us. It might make sense in isolation, but when we start shopping it around to other people and getting their input, we realize, oh, I'm missing this piece of evidence, or I need to really shore up this part of the presentation to make the call to action more powerful and more persuasive, you know. So that makes a big difference too.
And I think too, you could even integrate something that we do in the advertising marketing world, and that's like A/B testing, right? Yeah. Maybe you're giving the same exact presentation to two different companies, and so maybe most of the presentation is exactly the same, but the call to actions are different, and see which one resonates better and gets you more of the results that you're looking for.
Absolutely. I love that idea. That's a great point. One additional thing that reminds me of, to add on to that, is utilizing social media.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes LinkedIn or Twitter, or sometimes you have an internal company Slack or Asana channel, for example, and you can kind of do some testing, so to speak. You can kind of test the waters to see, okay, how open are people to this call to action or to this recommendation or this suggestion? You know, are they very open to it? When I throw it out into the Slack channel, do people seem to respond positively, or is it kind of a dud? Yeah. You know, are people kind of like metaphorically looking at each other like, what is this guy talking about? You know, so I want to know that before going into the high stakes presentation situation, because I can adjust accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think testing it out, whatever the case may be, whether you do the A/B testing or you test it on your colleagues, your friends, your family, what have you, I feel like there's really some power to that.
Absolutely. One other question that I've gotten: how can you make sure your call to action is consistent with the rest of the presentation? I think we mentioned earlier, like making sure that it's congruent. Mm-hmm. So I'll give my thoughts, and I'd love your thoughts, Julie, as well. I think you should be thinking about the ultimate call to action right from the get-go. As you know, even days or weeks before the actual presentation, the day of the meeting itself, you want to be thinking about, what is it ultimately I want my audience to do with this information, if anything? and then infuse that as you build out the presentation. And as you're building your outline and your specific evidence and data, because if you stay focused like a laser on that specific action, then that will come through at every stage of the presentation development process, right? But if it's kind of like just an afterthought that you tack on at the end, then that's when you run the risk of things being more discombobulated and disconnected. So it really goes back to the preparation phase, I think. That's going to make a big difference, making, being conscientious of that, right? And all the way through from the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like we do in copywriting, you want to have that call to action in mind, from the very beginning, and, integrating different, like, it's almost like dropping hints, throughout your presentation, getting them to the point of where you want them to be like, okay, are you ready for this call to action? Because here it comes. I really want you to act, like, right now. Like, we've built up to this, now it's time to act. And I feel like, there are ways to do that in a presentation, in a corporate setting, just by, adding those hints along the way.
Yeah, exactly. Any other last tips or tactics that you've seen work really well in the copywriting context or advertising? Because we can learn, as presenters and speakers, we can learn so much from effective marketing and effective advertising. That's why I love these conversations with you, Julie, because you're such an expert and you have such great expertise in that area. But any other interesting tips or strategies that you've seen work really well from a persuasiveness standpoint that might apply in either in-person or remote presentation situations?
I would just say, remember the benefits to so I always want to say consumer, because again, that's my advertising marketing background. But
your audience is essentially the consumer of your information, right? It's the same
so thing. Your audience in your presentation, remember them. What is going to hit home with them? And I feel like that's really where you've got to go. And the call to action doesn't need to be some long drawn out story or anything. It just needs to have some sort of action point. So the simpler, the better. Don't make it complicated, and make it very, very easy for them to take action and do what it is that you want to do.
Yeah, that's a great note to end on. So we're going to leave it there for today. Thanks a lot for joining, everybody. Hope you found that beneficial and useful. And Julie, thanks a lot as well for all of your great insights and info. And we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.